Legendary AF, or legendary as fuck, is the tagline for Hellboy in the poster. 2019, Hellboy 2019, this is the reboot of the Guillermo del Toro movies, and I can tell you, this movie is anything but legendary AF. Honestly, whoever came up with that tagline needs to get, like, fired, slapped up, because it's a terrible tagline. If you're gonna have a tagline like that, your movie needs to live up to, okay? I can tell you one thing, the poster lives up to that tagline, but not the movie, because, I mean, I'm looking at that poster like it's a snack, and hot diggity dang, is that poster amazing looking. Like, all the Photoshop that went into that poster to make Hellboy look badass. He's got his fiery sword, looking like he came straight from hell. Now, that is what I call badassery. That is the epitome of badassery right there, the poster, and the various other posters that have come out over the movie. This movie, just from the posters, look amazing. That's where the hype got built up. You know, you hear that, oh look, you got David Harbour as Hellboy. He went all into shape, you know, his body transformation, and you see him in the poster with all the prosthetic makeup of Hellboy. You see him photoshopped really well. He's like, damn, he looks badass. You see his face, oh, he's got that mean scowl. You hear the director's Neil Marshall. Oh, this is the director of The Descent. He's, you know, used to directing these kind of like dark movies with a lot of violence in them, you know. He says, oh, he's going to direct an R-rated Hellboy movie. Damn, this movie's going to be sick, dog. And then you watch the movie and you're like, what? Oh no, scrap that. You watch the trailer and you're like, this looks like shit. Like, honestly, what a night and day comparison this is from, like, the movie to what, like, the marketing is, alright, on the posters. But I'm not going to lie that I would buy that poster and put it in my room. It's a really good poster. But yeah, just stare at the poster for 2 hours if you really want, because this movie is... I mean, is it worth going to? It depends on the kind of person you are, because if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, for example, this movie's taken a big trashing from critics, right? This is where I raise the question, is Hellboy 2019, because this is a reboot, really as bad as people say? With a 15% on the tomato meter, but 64% on the audience scores. I guess there's a bit of a divide there, kind of, but not by much. It's not an insane divide. It's just kind of audiences are, you know, always like more lenient on movies, where the critics are much more harsh. Although that is kind of just the general. It's not always the truth. We've seen cases where the critics are like, "Oh, yeah, this is a great movie," and the audience is like, "Nah, fam." Again, Star Wars, TLJ, The Last Jedi is an example of this. But yeah, let's look at some of the reviews here. We can see, watching Hellboy is my new personal idea of hell, and this rating is a 0 out of 4. Okay, first of all, you know all these people saying this movie is like the worst thing of all time. They need to calm down, okay? It's not that bad, but it's still bad, if you get what I'm saying. But if you look at all the reviews, you can see that it is mostly rotten. It's like, you'll find like a one fresh, you know, review in a bunch of these like kind of rotten reviews, and even then the fresh reviews might not be all that positive. It might be like, yeah, it was fine, the pacing was a bit messy, blah blah blah. But yeah, overall, this movie is not doing well at the box office, it's failing. Let's kind of dissect this big mess of a movie, okay? First of all, that poster is amazing, but enough about the poster. Let's talk about the movie. I think the best question to ask before going into this movie is, why does this movie exist? Right? Because even from watching the first trailer, I was like, why is this movie happening? Like, Hellboy was never like a financial success of a like IP or a, you know, franchise. You look at the first two Guillermo del Toro movies that, you know, very kind of well received by the fans. Those two movies didn't do too well at the box office. Like, I'm surprised the first Hellboy even got a sequel due to how low the box office income was. It's probably due to like Blu-ray and DVD release that kind of got it upwards into getting the Hellboy 2 Goldeneye. But when they went up with Hellboy 2, you know, that budget, it was like, nah, we're not making a third one. But then why does this movie exist, alright, all these years later? Like, if you're going to make another Hellboy movie with this franchise that isn't so successful, you might as well get Guillermo del Toro back and Ron Perlman for a third Hellboy, right? I think this is one of those cases where too much time has passed. It's like, we can't get him back, and Guillermo del Toro's probably busy doing other things. He won an Oscar recently. And he's like, alright, we can't get him back. Ron Perlman is too old. I guess that can be a reason. But really, if you're going to make, like, why would you wait this long to make another Hellboy movie? Like, you know this franchise isn't going to be a success. You might as well just give Guillermo the money to make a third one sooner than, you know, make this kind of tonally confusing, awkwardly paced mess of a movie with so many problems, not only plaguing the screenplay, but the production of the movie as well, which is insane, alright? When you have, you know, production problems, that's when you know your movie isn't going to turn out well, okay? You can look at, like, Suicide Squad and, you know, other kind of movies, like Fantastic, yeah, that's the title of that movie. Even, like, any movie with a terrible production, I don't recall ever being good. No, there's very few cases, but stuff like your Amazing Spider-Man 2s, which is like, But yeah, I find it quite baffling that the studio even decided to reboot a property like Hellboy due to the fact that this franchise was never a commercial success before. Just let Guillermo have the money to make a third one. Like, he's been dying to do the third one for ages, so why bother doing this reboot of a franchise that isn't even a big success? Like, people who look at Hellboy, it's not like a property like you got Iron Man, alright? It's not like a Marvel property that can just make money. So it's like, why would you put so much money into just rebooting this thing when people generally don't like reboots? They want a continuation. So just, it makes no sense from a studio perspective unless you look at it, oh, wait a second, we can, you know, Hellboy's based on a comic book, and comic book movies are doing well. We can make this into some kind of like superhero movie. And you can see that reflected in the Deadpool kind of like tone of the movie, where they try to go more comedic, and it just really doesn't work with this movie. It is not funny whatsoever. The comedy is so terribly written. It's just really cringy, if anything. And the thing is, they even try do a sequel bait at the end of this movie, I won't spoil what the sequel bait is, but they're obviously trying to set up kind of like a franchise, like, oh yeah, we're going to make a Hellboy 2 and a Hellboy 3, and who knows, we might make spin-offs of other characters if they want to get really crazy with it. But no, none of that's going to be happening due to the low box office. I'd be very surprised if we got a sequel to this iteration of Hellboy. But yeah, everything that Guillermo del Toro contributed to the character in this IP is absent, such as the imaginative and, you know, creative creature designs, which are now mostly replaced by bland CGI monsters, which really do not look good, right? The CGI in this movie can range from looking alright to absolutely awful in this movie. While there are some good kind of prosthetics in the movie, like there's one creature which, you know, looks pretty good in this kind of creative sequence with this moving house, I think the design for that creature was very imaginative. And also Hellboy himself, he can look good in certain scenes, right, when the cinematography is lit really well, okay? Because depending on how Hellboy's lit, if it's like straight out in bright daylight, he looks absolutely awful. He looks very rubbery and just fake. Whereas if you look at certain scenes, the way, like, how he's lit, he looks pretty decent. Like, the poster is a perfect example of how Hellboy can look good. Like, how, if you make sure all kind of the lighting is right, yeah, he can look absolutely badass. But if the lighting and the cinematography is terrible, he's going to look bad. And furthermore, this film is just fundamentally broken from the weak writing of certain characters and their motivations, and not to mention how loose the structure really feels, because this pacing is absolutely terrible, especially in like the second act. There are moments where you're just kind of like bored, because it just kind of cuts from like action scene to action scene with pointless exposition in between, with really unlikable characters as well. It's like there's nothing in this movie that made me care. Like, this story, or rather a lack of a story in this formulaic kind of movie and how it's constructed, it just makes the movie really boring. But yeah, there's just kind of like no intriguing narrative in this. There's definitely a lack of a coherent narrative structure, as we just kind of cut from action scene to action scene. And yeah, it just kind of feels tedious and just monotonous to kind of get through. And the editing doesn't help in making this movie feel like just any more better, because again, the editing, they just constantly keep cutting back to boring shot to reverse shot multiple times in like the span of 30 seconds with no meaning to the cuts, and like the scenes themselves are not filmed in any kind of special way. They're just kind of flat, like, because the movie looks very flat in certain sequences. And yeah, it's not good. And also, as I mentioned, the dialogue and the scenes are also very hard to sit through due to this R rating that makes the, you know, the directors or the writers feel like, oh, we got an R rating, we can just have characters just drop the F-bomb, you know, every like 2 minutes. And it's really, it's not engaging dialogue whatsoever. And again, the only compliment I can give the movie, as I mentioned before, is kind of like the violence in it. The violence is very over the top, and that's kind of where you can get the most entertainment out of the movie, because you're seeing bodies kind of split in half, and it's so ridiculous that you can be entertained from it. Although there is a point in the movie where it just kind of gets so over the top, where you just kind of become desensitized to it, and the violence is just kind of like, alright, but have you got anything else? Have you got a story? Because it's very kind of, the violence is very just pointless, really. It gets so over the top where you're just like, yeah, you didn't need to go this over the top. So And another problem with the violence is how none of it is practical. There's a bunch of CGI blood squibs of how, like, whenever Hellboy's shooting someone or cutting someone's limbs off, you know, he's a demon, he's ripping bodies apart. But whenever that's happening, it's not actual, like, practical effects that goes into it. It's all CGI blood squibs, right? Like, it's all done in a computer, all digitally enhanced. Oh, look, we're going to digitally add blood in here, but that makes it look all fake, and it's not as engaging as it would be if it was actually practical blood effects. So that's, I feel like, if Guillermo del Toro had an R rating, he could, like, do some pretty amazing effects work. Like, already the first two Hellboy movies are almost like masterpieces in terms of the practical effects work. So imagine, you know, what Guillermo del Toro, like, we've seen him do violence, and he's always a practical man. He always does the violence in a practical way. So it's disappointing the violence is all CGI blood squibs in this. Although I didn't have a big problem with it, because if I'm going to enjoy anything about the movie, it certainly isn't going to be the story behind this, or the character work, or, you know, the direction or pacing. Nope, it's just going to be kind of from the violence, which I think are entertaining. So I can give the movie that kind of compliment, as well as maybe David Harbour's, you know, prosthetics in certain scenes looking. Oh yeah, I guess he looks fine here, not as good as he looks in the poster though. Again, when he's in broad daylight, with no interesting direction in terms of the cinematography, he's, again, just looking rubbery and just fake. He looks really fake in those sequences. Overall, if I would just kind of like tell you what to do, I'd say just stare at the poster instead of sitting for this dumpster fire, because sadly, even though this movie has a lot of potential with its skilled director at the helms, and also you got a good cast, right? You got David Harbour, who's pretty good, and his body transformation, like, he certainly looks the role of Hellboy, although the Hellboy character in this is very weak. And you also got Ian McShane as you know, the scientist, the father of Hellboy. That's good casting. Ian McShane is really good in the stuff he is in. Here, of course, it's just, if you're in a bad movie, not much is going to save you. You can't really do much, and yeah, especially with some of the bad CGI that he's involved with, it just looks awful, especially with the dialogue in the script. This is one of those movies that it's got a lot of, like, great stuff going behind it, but it's that writing of the script and the production going behind this that really made this movie just awful. There was not enough creative freedom for the director to do whatever he wanted with this comic book property. Because if you imagine, you know, what you could have with a director, Neil Marshall, who could, like, take this, you know, comic book property and do whatever he really wanted with an R rating, now you have an interesting concept. But if you just have a studio being like, oh, we want some things to be done with Hellboy, like Lionsgate, you can imagine them going behind Neil Marshall and be like, yeah, we need it to appeal to more people, we need it to have more action, we need it to be, like, more superhero-y, we need to kind of compete in that field, because this is the only comic book property that we own. At that point, it just feels like this was made so Lionsgate could try to bank on the Hellboy franchise, because it's a comic book. But, I mean, you need to have a good movie, first of all, and it seems like no one behind this movie is happy about the final product. And yeah, it's a shame that this came out. Just watch the Del Toro movies. They still exist. But yeah, that's going to be the end of this video, so if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like and share, and if you come across the channel for the first time, why not subscribe, as we'll make another video kind of like this. You know, I say we, but it's really me. There's not anyone else behind the scenes, it's just me making these videos. So if you enjoyed, you know, there'll probably be something like this in the future. I mean, who really knows, I could do anything really in my next upload. But yeah, make sure to subscribe, and this is Magma Infinity signing out. Peace.